Okay, so tonight I thought I'd talk a little bit about the Azure certification program. There have been quite a few changes recently in this program, so I thought I might be able to uncloud some of the mysteries, see what I did there, and talk a little bit about the exams and a few things you might be interested to know about them. But before we get much further, I think we need to clear up the terminology here and make sure that we understand what we mean by certified. It's not certifiable, okay? So that you understand that. Oh, and I don't really know where that last picture came of. Apparently, if you search certified in Google Images, you'll come up with a picture of our U.S. President-elect. So we probably should show him a little bit more respect. He is, after all, going to be the new Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. So here's somebody who truly is certifiable. Anybody who knows me would attest to that. For the benefit of the recording, yeah, that's me. And probably the most relevant piece of information is that badge up in the upper left-hand corner. So that's the badge that you earn when you've passed the Azure exam for Azure Developer. And hopefully that lends a little bit of credibility to this talk tonight. So it's a fair question to ask why we would go through the certification process. After all, there's an awful amount of time and effort that you have to spend in order to be able to pass these exams. So what would be the motivation for doing that? Well, it depends. There's a lot of different incentives for doing it. But I'll start by quoting a few statistics. These first couple are from a study done by CompTIA called the Employer Perceptions of IT Training and Certification. It was done in January of 2011. And so it's a few years old, but apparently 86% of hiring managers indicate that IT certifications are a high or medium priority during the candidate evaluation process. And in the same study, they also said that 8 in 10 HR execs verify certifications among job candidates. Microsoft did its own study in April 2012, Microsoft Certification Program Satisfaction Study, and in that they claimed that 91% of hiring managers consider certification as part of their hiring criteria. So that seems kind of high to me, but I think what we can clearly divine from that is that certification definitely is an important measurement of skill, at least in some aspects. And if you're looking for a new job or looking maybe to get promoted in your current job, there's probably some benefit to pursuing that. Is it really the best way to evaluate somebody's competency? If someone passes an exam, does that mean for sure that they're competent in Azure? If they can't pass the exam, does it mean they're incompetent? Well, I think we all know exceptions into both of those cases. But it's like democracy, you know, it's the worst form of government except for all of the others. So it's really hard to be able to judge someone's capability if you don't know them and actually have seen them working. So exams is just one sort of marker that you can use for that. The other aspect, other than if you're wanting to get a job or a promotion or meet partner criteria for your organization, is that some people just want to be able to learn more, and taking an exam kind of gives them that little incentive to learn. Because I'll tell you what, we all probably work with Azure to some degree or another, but we work with little bits of it. But to pass this exam, Azure is so broad, you have to be across a lot of different things. So studying for an exam kind of gives you a bigger picture of how everything works. So now that we've talked about the motivations, we talked about the certification paths a bit. And there have been some changes here recently. Has anybody got this certification before, MCSD? You have, Paul. Great. Well, I'm not sure whether you know, but Microsoft has killed this one off now. So they've announced that they're actually retiring this particular certification as of March 31st next year. And to earn this particular one, you had to take 3 exams, which was the 7.0, 532, 533, and 534. It's the Developer, Infrastructure, and Solution Architect exams for Azure. So even though they've killed off this particular badge, they haven't killed off the exams. The exams are still relevant. They earn you a new path. So the path they're really talking about is this bottom line here, towards the cloud platform. And it's probably a little hard to see, so I'll see if I can zoom in on it. So you can see that all 3 of those exams are listed, as well as a couple of others. If you do any 2 of them, you earn yourself the MCSA in Cloud Platform. So MCSA stands for Microsoft Certified Solutions Associate. And then If you do one more exam, which also includes all 3 of those original ones, then you can earn the MCSE, which is the Microsoft Certified Solutions Expert. And then to maintain that, you have to take 1 exam each year, just to keep it current. So it'd be interesting trying to work out which exam you take each year. So that's the new certification path.
Dan, do you know, originally it was each of those exams had like a lifespan of 2 years?
Right.
Is it still the case, or as you say, you just need to take 1 exam every year?
I believe that's the case, that you just need to refresh by taking another exam.
You keep taking the same exam each year?
Not the same exam. I think it's a different one.
I'd say the list of those exams would change every year.
It probably will. Yeah, no, you wouldn't take the same exam again to keep it current. You'd have to take a different one. Okay, out there. So preparing for the exam. The first thing you should do if you're going to think about taking one of these exams is, of course, understand what is the scope of the exam and what does it cover. And what's happened is that last month, they refreshed all 3 of these exams so that there's new content. And it's a good thing they did, because those exams are quite old. They were about 3 years old, and a lot of the stuff on it was out of date, and it didn't include any of the new stuff. So it was well in need of a refresh. But this one's a pretty major one. So what I've done here is I've shown you on the left side, this is what it was until the end of last month, and the right side is the new stuff. So I've highlighted the new features in yellow and put in red the stuff that seems to have disappeared. And it's interesting to see what's happened. So cloud services has pretty much disappeared. And I think that's probably a signal to us from Microsoft that they're looking to eventually deprecate that, because they want to replace it with all of the PaaS services that they're offering now, which is, of course, all included in the new exam. The other thing is that everything is moved towards ARM now, so Azure Resource Manager. So everyone wants to pay very careful attention to Paul's talk tonight. And also, they've added a few other things like DocumentDB, and in the identity space, they've added B2C and B2B for Active Directory. But one thing that seems to have disappeared a bit is there's not as much concentration on understanding virtual networks and doing network configuration. Now, that link at the bottom will take you to the page that has the scope listed on it, but beware, they list the scope on the web page itself, but it still shows the old scope. But there's a link there to download a PDF that has the updated content, and the PDF has the new stuff in it. So if you just look at the page, you'll be studying the wrong stuff. For the 533, the story is even a little bit worse, because the website and the PDF that's on the page is still the old scope, but there is a new refreshed scope. So you might want to take note of that. This, by the way, it's much more detailed too on the page. These headings and these subheadings, there are subheadings under the subheadings as well that tell very, very specific tasks that you're going to be tested on. I couldn't fit it all on the slide, but if anybody wants a copy, if they're thinking about the 533 exam and you want a copy of the new scope, let me know. I've got a PDF of it. In fact, I might just put it up on the Meetup site because I honestly can't find where you can download that from. I got my copy because I signed up for the Next Up course and it was given to me. So. And you see the same pattern here. They've basically dropped off cloud services. There's a lot more emphasis on ARM. And the last exam is, of course, the 534 Architecting Azure Solutions. Now, for that one, that appears to be current on the website when you go there, so that I don't know what the previous scope was because I can't seem to access it anymore. What I've been told about this exam is that this kind of encapsulates a lot of the material from both the 532 and the 533. So if you're doing them in a certain order, it probably makes sense to do this one last. So as far as how to study, obviously this varies from person to person. Some methods work better for other people than other methods. But the one thing I will say is make sure that you don't stick to just one method. Try at least 2 or 3 of these different approaches, because no one method is ever going to really prepare you adequately for the exam. So, guidebooks are great, and that picture there of that book, you actually, for the 532 exam, you can't even download that anymore. Microsoft discontinued it because they just couldn't keep it up to date enough. If anybody really wants a copy of that, you can talk to somebody who may have the PDF. but I can tell you that it's in no way really going to prepare you well enough for the exam. First of all, it's outdated now, and secondly, it just doesn't go down to the level that you really need. But it does give it, an overview, I guess. One thing I would really recommend is practice exams. They definitely are worth their weight in gold as far as preparing, because it really gives you, not only the material to study, but also just the experience of how you take the exam and the kind of questions. And generally, I find that the practice exams are a little bit harder than the actual test. So if you can do well on the practice exam, then you're well poised. Study groups too, I got to say that one good thing about that is that if you can get together with a buddy or two who has the same goal, you can kind of push each other and share information as well. And I've got to really give a big shout out to Dale and to Todd, because they ran the Brisbane study group for the 532 exam all the way through October and half of November. And I can tell you that if it wasn't for that, I'm sure I wouldn't have passed the exam. So just having to show up every Wednesday night and dedicate that time to sit there and listen to the excellent presentations they put together, it really helped a lot. So, and nothing beats actually doing things. So these exams, they test your knowledge about how to do things in Azure. So you get a lot of scenarios saying, how do you provision a website? What's the first thing you do? And if you actually spend time in the portal doing things like that, that's going to be excellent preparation for you. If you just study and read in a book, it's going to be a lot harder for you to really answer those kind of questions. So get out there, get in the portal, and actually do stuff, and do it the PowerShell as well. Take time to actually try running some PowerShell commands. Even if you're copying from somewhere and typing them out, it'll kind of ingrain with the pattern of those, because PowerShell does play a big part in the exams. Another option that's available for you, and this is pretty recent that came out, I think Ross just discovered this as well, is that there's some fantastic deals if you want to take these exams. First of all, you can access a bunch of free courses for nothing, but if you want to actually take the exam, for $99, you can get an exam voucher with a retake and a practice test. So the exam, just registering for the exam alone, I think is $169. So $99 is already a good bargain with that. And the practice exams are usually about $100 a piece too. So that's really, really good value. And if you really want to commit to go all the way to the MCSE, you can spend, less than $300 and get all 3 exams covered this way. So that looks like those are US dollars, yeah, okay. So it's still a good deal.
They have announced a whole extra free courses in the free tier in the last week or two, if you've been looking at LinkedIn.
Yes.
A couple of posts now.
Yeah, they really are. Microsoft is really trying to help people with this. They want more people certified. So, how many people in here have actually taken a certification exam in the last 3 years? Well, a few of you. Good. So if you're not used to the experience, it's worth understanding a little bit about how you need to approach it. So Microsoft has learned that the typical traditional multiple choice thing is not always the most effective way to test people's knowledge. So they've tried to make the exams a little bit more realistic and real world, and design the questions in such a way that you really kind of have to know what you're doing and can't just be lucky at guessing answers. So about maybe half of the exam might be your traditional multiple choice, but at least the other half of it is going to involve a lot of interactive type questions where you have a lot of drag and drop type things. And I'll show you examples of those in a couple of seconds. There's also a lot of case studies. In previous exams, you might have seen 1 or 2 case studies where you get a whole bunch of information, a background, and some problems and business and technical requirements. Sometimes they're pages of information, and then you get about 5 or 6 questions on that to answer. There are lots of them in Azure, so that's a new approach that they use. I think I mentioned before, there is a fair amount of PowerShell too on these, so you need to learn that. You don't need to be able to write it from hand, but you need to be familiar with the commands and the structure of them, so that, you'll have drag and drop type experiences with that. So 700 is a passing score on the exam, which is not necessarily 70%. There's kind of a dark art on how they work out the weighting and the scoring of the exam, but it's always 700 is passing. The exams are generated each instance, so 2 people sitting and taking the same exam won't necessarily get the same questions. And because of that, everything's expressed in a range. When I sat my exam, I'm pretty sure it was 45 questions, and I had 2.5 hours to finish it, which sounds like a lot of time, and it wasn't, actually. Important to realize there's no partial credit. If you got an exam where, there's multiple parts to the answer and you get part of it right, sorry, it's all wrong. However, there's no penalty for getting an answer wrong, so you should never leave a question unanswered. And you can go back and review the questions if you're not sure, if you don't want to burn too much time thinking about it. But keep in mind that you can only review within the section that you're in the exam. You won't be able to go back to a previous section, and I'll talk about what that means now. Case studies are their own section of the exam. So as I mentioned, it gives you kind of a real-world scenario, and there's a lot of stuff to read, and then you answer some questions. Some people like to jump straight to the questions and then go back and try to look up the material. Other people like to read everything and get really familiar with it and then look at the questions. For me, I found it worked best for me to just scan all the information, just enough to know where the information is, and then when I look at the questions, I know where to find it. Because only about 20% of all the information they give you will be relevant to the questions that they ask you. But just remember that they're isolated. So, for example, you'll start case study 1, you'll get 5 questions. When you get to the end of those 5 questions, it'll ask you if you want to review anything, and if you say no, that's fine, you can go on, but then you can't go back to those afterwards. So it's important to pace yourself. Only at the very beginning of the exam will it tell you how many total questions there are on the exam. So in my case, for example, I had 45 questions. Write that down. You get like a bit of laminated paper and you can write on it. Write down the number of questions total that you have. And as you go through the exam, keep track of how many questions you've answered, because otherwise you might get to case study 4 and you've got like 30 minutes left on the clock. And you're not sure about some answers, you want to think about reviewing it more, but you don't know whether there's another case study after that, right? So just keep track of how many questions, and then you'll know.
There's no time for case studies?
No, the time limits for the whole exam. So you can spend, 3/4 of the exam on one case study if you want, but, obviously that wouldn't advise it. So some sample exam question types. So this is, of course, your traditional type multiple choice. Some multiple choice questions will have more than one answer, and usually on the exam they tell you, they'll say, what 3 options here would you follow? Which is better than a lot of the practice exams do. The practice exams often don't tell you how many.
Tick all that apply.
Yes, that's right. But you also get a lot of questions like this, and this is your drag and drop scenario, where you'll have something you've got to fill in the blanks, and you'll get a whole bucket full of things that you can drag and drop in. There will always be many more of these than there are actual answers to provide, so you've got to select the right ones. And sometimes you can use the same one more than once. So it's a bit tricky. Really, you have to know the material. You can see how that's much more difficult than a multiple choice. Another very popular one is what are the steps required to do something? And you'll get a whole list of steps over here that you need to drag and drop and put them in the right order. So even if you get all the correct steps, but you have 2 of them out of order, the question's wrong. Also, you get, for drag and drop, when they have, when I mentioned about PowerShell commands and also some, code samples, you never have to actually write code, but you'll get something like this. You'll get a sample of code and there'll be blanks. And then you'll have that bucket full of things that you can drag and drop to put in there. So just some resources for you. I've included this, and I will post these slides as well, so you have access to those links. The first 3 things there are some blog posts that talk about the new certification paths. And the last 3 things there are just some access for learning materials, including Virtual Academy. There's a link to that. MOOC is where that fantastic deal of $99 or $279. And of course, Pluralsight, if you go to that search link, you'll pull up a whole bunch of courses that are relevant to Azure certification. Any questions? All right, thank you very much, everyone.